Alright, so this is going to be a video response to the Man of Earth, Why Assume God, which is a video response to Rational Roundtable and the discussions he was having and whatnot. Now, I'm not going to be specifically defending everything about what Rational Roundtable has been saying, but I'm going to add my opinions on the matter. Okay, you make the claim that living things cannot do arbitrary things. And sure, it's based on pre-existing conditions, but I think the point of the claim is that even though it's based on the subjectivity, or based on the objectivity of chemical reactions and the laws of physics, it is based upon a subject, and oftentimes you don't see emergent properties in nature resulting in subjectivity. I'd find it hard to imagine that gravity is subjective, or physics is subjective. I think this kind of illustrates my point. However, humans are a part of nature, so the example could be considered a weak analogy, and I understand this, but I'll get back to this later and you'll see how it all fits in. Now, arbitrary is defined as subject to individual will or judgment without restriction, contingent solely upon one's discretion. Now, even if our free will is limited to pre-existing conditions, I don't think we're necessarily restricted, and I don't think you could appeal to this hard reductionism in making your case. When studying things on maybe the atomic level, that doesn't allow us to see the patterns that emerge and allow unrestricted behavior. Even if the behavior is enforced by preferences. And oftentimes, I don't think nature, in the general sense, has subjective preferences. You can't see a forest by simply staring at each individual tree, for example. Now, I'll get back to this in a second. I've been saying that a couple times, so hold your breath. Claiming quantum physics is completely and utterly random seems to be a bit of an argument from ignorance, considering we just merely label something as random when we don't understand why it happens. For example, if I knew something about the potential energy of me holding a coin, for example, and exerting a specific amount of force onto this coin, causing it to land on heads, I just simply assert it's 50% random, based on the nature of the results. However, if I know how much force to exert onto it, and I am aware of my surroundings, then I can successfully predict with a 100% success rate what side it will land on. So it's not just random. And now I can kind of hope that you see that it's the coin flip, for example, is not dependent on being random. You kind of have to go outside the box and look in. The same way with the brain, maybe. It's not dependent. It doesn't have to be dependent on the actions on the brain. I mean, correlation doesn't mean causation. It can certainly play a role, but you can't necessarily conclude that it's dependent, maybe. Of course, that might be a bit of a stretch, and I'm not specifically defending that, so let's move on. But if I knew nothing about any of this, I'd just say it was 50-50, random, chance. So I don't think just because we don't know that much about quantum physics, we can simply assert that it's all random. And often, it's just simply easier to say it's just random in everyday conversation. Now, you go into a bit of a rant at the end asserting the nature of this God is conjecture, devoid of logic or reason. Now, let's assume for the sake of argument we could deductively prove the existence of an immaterial, eternal, conscious being by predicting what would be a sufficient cause to the universe, in which we would be able to know by understanding said universe and how it could be caused. Not fully understanding the nature of how this being could create doesn't exactly shed much doubt on this being's existence, because if we had to explain explanations, we could go in an infinite regress of explanations, and we would not be able to believe anything. Now, going back to free will, if we could demonstrate this being's existence and conceded it was immaterial, you can now see how this works out, don't you? We can still apply the concept of something that is alive to this being. But that doesn't mean it has the characteristics of what is commonly defined as alive. To be alive, something has to be able to adapt, evolve, it has to be able to grow and reproduce. Well, God doesn't exactly do any of those things, but we would still consider him alive, wouldn't we, even if we just considered it as a concept? Now, to appeal to naturalism and limit God's actions based on what we find studying our brains and our inability to have libertarian free will doesn't exactly mean we can formulate an inductive inference and apply it to God. So I think the point would still stand that if nature doesn't do arbitrary things, God could be considered living and be able to use free will, even if we don't have free will. Based solely upon the necessary definition of God that would allow our existence to follow, he would use free will. So, also you say something about you don't necessarily think this would follow that the Abrahamic God was real, and I would concede on that point because, yeah, I think that would be a bit of a stretch, and I'm not necessarily here to defend that anyway, so that's about it. See ya.